Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Janice Hughes, and I want to welcome you to the most updated show of Growth Without Risk. And I'd like to take this opportunity. I'm going to introduce myself a little bit and why I'm so honored to be here. And honored to be here to support ChiroSecure and what ChiroSecure and Dr. Stu Hoffman are bringing to all of you within the profession. And I don't just mean us as chiropractors. My background, is definitely as a chiropractor, but for any of us in the health professions, ChiroSecure is focusing on bringing you the latest tools and technology and resources. So that's where this show, today's edition, Growth Without Risk, I'm really honored to be one of the new hosts. So what I will be doing is about every 5 to 6 weeks, I will be bringing to you different people, interviews, concepts related to growing your professional practice. Now, why I can talk about that or share some insights, I tease that upcoming 2020 is my 30th year in chiropractic. And in some ways it's gone by in a flash, and in others, I sort of laugh about lots of lessons, life lessons along the way. So one of my commitments now to the profession is to share. And part of doing that, my new company with my partners through To Inspire Women, we've been really focused on bringing a lot of free resources and tools to you. And so through this show, I want to bring some of those, but more importantly, I want to bring you some of the experts that can really talk to you about some tools and things that you can use daily and weekly to grow your practice. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, not only do we want to grow, we want to help a lot of people, but we also want you doing really well. One of my big areas of focus is making sure that people are thriving in practice. So what I'd love to start with today is just setting up a little bit some of the concepts that I want to be bringing to you over the next number of shows. So one of the first pieces is that I really like to describe that every one of you is at a different stage of practice. Now, sometimes I think we feel like we're alone, like we're going through some things that no one else understands. But that's not the case. There's a lot of great resources and tools available to help at all phases of practice. So what I like to talk about is actually 3 stages. Number 1, and a lot of the about to be grads can relate to this, is called that startup phase. But I don't want you to think that that's only when you first graduate. In many cases, startup is even your first several years. And there's sort of a whole set of issues and things that we want to address related to that startup mentality. Now, we would then reach a point, the second phase in practice is what I call striving to thriving. Now, for some of you, that will be within the first several years that things are going well, and yet, if you're not careful, you feel like you're always on that treadmill or always trying to strive. So we really want to help shift that to become thriving. And there's a lot of growth tools and strategies that you can use in that phase. The third phase is what I like to call, sort of that exit strategy stage, or mature stage of practice. And it's really critical that we start to talk about tools and resources for growth at that point. Because sometimes if we're not careful, that's when some challenges occur, where we take our eye off the ball, or we have some huge wake-ups with associates, or by the time you go to sell your practice, all of a sudden you realize there's some things that you could have or should have been doing along the way to better increase the value. What I want you to understand is that at all 3 phases, I'm going to describe that I think growth is not just an option. I think growth is critical. And why I say that, I can express in my own 30 years that, the more I focused on growth, growing myself even as a person, the more my practice grew, the more my life grew. So I want you to understand that growth in your professional practice is actually a reflection of you. So the more we can help you with tools and ideas to expand, to grow yourself, the more you're going to thrive professionally. Now, you notice when I said about those 3 stages, I don't only mean startup for that first couple of years either, because now many of us in practice, we're doing things like starting up a whole new division of our business, You may be creating an online course. You may be creating new things that are a different division or a different facet of your practice and business. So in essence, you want to tap back into some of that startup energy or mentality, but in a good way, not in a stressful way. So those are the three different stages of practice. And as I bring different guests over some of the shows that I'm going to be hosting, I really want to help identify some of their tools or strategies for all three facets. That's why for me, this show is about anyone and everyone that's a health practitioner and our ability to help you grow. So then you hear me use the words tools and strategies, and I want to define that a little bit. I personally was never a very analytical person. So in the early phases of my practice, it was a lot more personality driven or individual driven. And if we're not careful, many of us build our practices related to that. So that word strategies, it's actually how do you break down and implement strategies for PR, for marketing? How do we sort of put in place strategies for how we groom or grow an associate? How we hire great staff and team members to work with us? How we build strategies is really going to allow for more growth in your business. Now, there's going to be different kinds of tools. And I know a lot of times we hear, especially from the practice management concept, that, literally, hiring a company or one voice, to be the tool or the resource for us. And personally, what I find is that the more you can bring in, I'm going to call it multiple tools, multiple resources, the better. So from my perspective, I like to define things like books, books to help grow your knowledge, books to help grow your concepts, courses that you can take, seminars that you can take, but one of the traps of professionals is that sometimes we're using those tools or resources. It's always like we're looking for more confidence. And if we're not careful, then suddenly we're trying to be at a program or be at something every single weekend, or so often that we're now not creating that balance or that feeling of balance in our family life or our personal life. So I like looking for a lot of tools, and I'll be sharing with you over some of the shows some of my recommendations, but also with our different guests, what are the tools they use? How do they grow themselves? Because I think that gives you something that you can really sink your teeth into and use at home regularly then as well. So I love to think, in terms of my background as a coach. Not only am I a chiropractor, I was in private practice for 15 years and then transitioned that practice and sold to one of my amazing associates. After that, I began to do a lot of coaching and teaching within the profession. And when I say coaching, I think coaching is really unique and distinct and a big part of growth and the growth mentality. Because coaching is a little different than telling people things. It doesn't mean that a coach isn't going to share strategies or technologies or tools. But the unique thing about that coaching approach and what I'm going to bring to this show is a lot where I ask you questions or get you to think about certain things. The more that a coach can ask questions or tap into the things within you, the better. And that really is where a lot of growth opportunity comes from. Not just taking someone else's system, but really applying it or making it your own. So for example, I learned years ago that I could take 10 of you and give every one of you the same strategy or systems. And what would tend to happen is that a couple of you would just thrive with that. You would just skyrocket using those systems. The problem is that the other extreme is that a couple would just not see any results or any change at all. And then it sort of staggers somewhere in the middle. So it tends to almost be like if I have 10, that a little bit like this would happen. Suddenly one or two at the top are just thriving and a couple at the bottom are not thriving at all. So one of the things that's unique, and I want you to recognize, is that every one of us is unique and individual. And it doesn't mean that those systems or what someone is sharing with you or asking you to try doesn't work. It may not be right for you. So some of it would be, how do we modify that? Or what's within you that we can grow more so you get more results from the things that someone is suggesting to you? Another key thing that I want to talk about today and really make sure we bring into the different shows is that it's really key not to just work in the practice. Many of us as chiropractors, we go in, we have a full day or a full shift, and we want you thriving and helping a lot of people. But then it's like we walk away from that and we walk into our full-time life, home life, family life, significant others. Some of you are very involved in the community. One of the things that I still find is that a lot of times we're not necessarily building in the time to work on the business, to work on the practice. And growth of your professional practice, growth of your professional life, and I'm even going to call it your professional business, is really based on you taking some time. And that doesn't have to be a lot of time, but it's almost like thinking in terms of becoming an executive, where you look at the facets or the systems in the business. You look at the people. You look at some key aspects of the business that you work on consistently. The last piece I'd like to share with you is we sort of set up some of my ideas and visions for the show. And I'd love your input on that, by the way. So please, at the end, I'll give you ways to connect with me. But a really key concept for me is the idea of goals, establishing goals for growth. And it's interesting, after coaching thousands of chiropractors and other health practitioners, what I find is everyone's got different ideas, or in some case, baggage about goals. And a little bit of that is that as we have been so goal driven or so goal focused, a real question arises, what if we don't achieve a goal? Or how about some of you who have set goals and you're finding that you're falling short of those, or that you don't feel like you're completely achieving those things? That's challenging. So if we're not careful, sometimes we get a little skeptical about goals. So what I want you to understand is that establishing some goals, or we might even call them objectives for growth, is really critical if we actually want to grow our practice. I think it was Einstein again that said, if we keep doing the same things but expect a different, outcome, that's the definition of insanity. And so it's really key for me that we help you come up with some ways to work on your business, to establish some objectives or some goals about growth, and then how that relates to actually growing your professional practice. So a lot of different things are fair game. We'll definitely talk about some in the practice tools and strategies. But remember, I started this little segment by saying that, growing ourselves is actually incredibly critical to grow our practice, to grow our business. And why, in closing, I want to share that I think for me, growth is critical. It's just not, an option. It's just a critical factor in life, is that I learned years and years ago from one of my mentors that if you're not, growing, what's happening is you're not actually staying the same, but you're shrinking. So everything is either growing or shrinking. I think it's our illusion that we can stay the same or keep ourselves or our practice or our life in the same place. But what happens is if you're not doing some things or setting some ideas and objectives for growth, it's like you're actually shrinking. Now, it may not in the short term impact the numbers. It may not impact the number of people that come in or that you can, help and share your skills with. But I'm going to share with you that in the long run, it does. Even if it's from a place of having a look at the practice, the business that you've built, if there is not growth in some facets of that, suddenly your practice is not valued as high as if you are continuing to show some growth. Likewise, I think a lot of personal level fulfillment, if we're not growing, if we think, well, everything's okay, or I want to keep things the way they are, what happens is you're actually shrinking a little bit. So even for some of you listening, where we sort of say, well, things are good, fabulous. But if we're not careful, I like to describe that good is the kiss of death of great. So what I would love to set as the tone for the shows and the segments that ChiroSecure is kind enough to let me host, I really want us thinking about how do we help growth? How do we help you thrive? And ultimately, I want that not only to be for the sake of the patients that you work with and the staff and the team that you work with, but I want that for you. I want that personally, professionally, and also financially, that we have you grow. So what I'd like to do in closing, I'd just like to share how to get a hold of me. We'll include some of those resources along with the show. Again, my name is Dr. Janice Hughes. I've been a chiropractor. I'm celebrating my 30th year in 2020. And you can get a hold of me. My email is Dr. Janice, so just drjanice at toinspirewomen.com, and we'll include that with the show notes. I also want to mention, by all means, check out To Inspire Women, our Facebook page. You can reach me through that, pose questions, comments, ask for some things that we could cover, some topics in some of the future sessions, and I'm really happy to entertain all of those. Again, I just want to close by saying thank you to ChiroSecure for allowing me to become part of the shows and the focus on growth without risk. I also want to let you know to tune in next week, as this show is a weekly show where we will have attorney Mike Misko joining as the host for that week. So thank you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to just give you a little bit of a lay of the land or ideas about what I'd like to cover with these segments that I'm going to be doing about growing your professional practice. Thank you again.